Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Montpelier-Roxbury Board of School Directors to order. It's 6:32 on May 21st, and our first order of business is public comment. We don't have anyone in the room, and usually Libby lets me know if somebody is on.
Hold on. You hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. There are no participants in the chat wanting to put their hand raised.
Okay, thank you, Libby.
I'll leave my audio. I'm going to leave my video off just because.
At least you're not in the driver's seat.
We appreciate the visual, though. Yes, that's good. And you're in the passenger seat.
Especially since you sound like Donald Duck.
All right. Before we move on to the consent agenda, I just wanted to make one addition to the agenda, which is that we're going to add a board discussion about the legislation at the state level after the board discussion about the operations committee proposal. And I wanted to just congratulate our high school students and our middle school students today for peacefully exercising their right to free speech and standing up for what they believe in. It's pretty cool to see students taking initiative like that. Pretty cool is definitely an understatement. It's awesome to see students taking initiative like that. And I also wanted to say thank you to our building administrators for providing the space for that, and to also ensuring safety during the action. So, which is also very important. And with that, let's move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I wondered if someone could explain the Community National Bank. Is it a loan?
Tim can, since Libby's in the, let's go with Tim.
Libby can too.
Yeah.
Nah, go
Okay.
for it.
This is a. Oh, I thought that was. I was wondering what that sound was. Sorry, big train. It is a tax anticipation note. So during the summer months, we are at our low point from a cash flow perspective, and so last year, as Christina described to the operations committee a couple weeks ago, we were getting closer than she's comfortable with, cash on hand. And so this is with our bank, Community National Bank, which is the entity we bank with, and it's to take out approximately $800,000. She anticipates not needing any more than 5, but we receive interest on it, so there's no real cost to it. And so from the operations committee's perspective, it's just prudent planning for the summer.
All right, thank you.
And we haven't done them in the past. Many schools do in the past few years. So I think it's new for, I think, us.
I had a quick question about the third bullet. There's not a document or anything, that's just we're authorizing the chair to sign, right?
Signing warrants.
That's something that's done every year.
Gotcha.
Any other discussion?
I'll
Okay.
thank the members of the negotiation committee and our teachers who negotiated to hopefully successfully ratify, our support staff. That's great. I appreciate the efforts.
Yes, definitely. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have some slight technical difficulties in that I should be a co-host in Zoom, but apparently right now it's Jake. And I also can't seem to leave Zoom, so I'm...
Do you need me to share it with Jake?
Right, if you share the presentation with Jake, he can put it up on the screen.
I can try to help.
So strange.
I've never
Sorry
been-
about that.
One of those days.
Sorry about that, Mia. I can't see you in the list of participants, Mia. I'm sorry.
Maybe I'm not in it. Okay, I'm
You're
gonna,
listed as Montpelier-Roxbury School Board.
well, that's our friends
Oh.
at Orca. So I'm gonna just click the Zoom link again and try and get in the meeting one more time. I saw it very briefly where I could join as a panelist. And then it went away. Oh, okay, great.
Just mute yourself.
My computer.
Yeah, mute your own computer.
It is muted. But now you hear me through here.
And your speakers?
Oh, there we go.
All set now. Yep.
Thank
all
you.
set.
Okay, so now I'm going to share the presentation. Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So yeah, our student presentation today is a little different than the last ones where we're like towards the end of the season. I think the last one was towards the end of our winter sports season. So this presentation just gives some micro updates to the activities going on here, whether it's every sports team and like fun events that we do towards the end of the year. That we will talk more about. It's an exciting time of year. Ideally, it's getting nicer out, but this May has chosen to do other things. But yeah, we're just going to talk a bit about every sport team and how they're doing this season, a week or two before playoffs, and then just fun events that are happening here that I think some of them board members are invited to, I believe. Libby could correct me on that. Okay, to start is boys open ultimate frisbee. This year, unfortunately, there was no girls team because there weren't enough players, which meant that any person could try out for the team, and there is a JV and a varsity. Right now, if there was a game earlier this week, I have not updated this. So last time I checked, they were 5-1, and they're sitting third in Division 1. They came back this past weekend from the Pioneer Valley Invitational. It's a high-level tournament in Massachusetts. They call it PVI for short. They do it every single year. And last year, because they won the B division, they moved up to the A division, and they finished second place this year and had a really great time despite some injuries and discs to the face. But it was a really good tournament for them this year, and it's one of the things that the team looks forward to every single year.
Is it true that they camp?
Yeah.
They camp at
Yes.
this tournament?
Yeah.
Man, that's gotta be
Yeah.
a stinky ride home. It's awesome. Next. Okay.
I know nothing about lacrosse whatsoever, but I can tell you that our girls lacrosse team, which is together with U32, is currently 7-3 with wins and losses this year. And we just have a small group of Montpelier students competing with the U32 team this year because we don't have enough students to have our own team at this school. And boys lacrosse is our own team, and we have some U32 players on it, and they celebrated their senior night this Thursday at their game against Milton. They're currently 4-4 this year and third in D3. Next slide.
I'm gonna go too far. I just hit the thing.
Oh.
Let's try it again. There we go.
Baseball this year, we are currently 8-2. Last year was a very strong season. We didn't get far in the playoffs due to an upset, but we've had a pretty strong team, a good amount of returning players. This week there's 3 games at home and maybe 4 games total. So if you just look out at the Peyton Smith Field or get to the rec field, I'm sure there are games there, and we're currently third in D2.
Tennis. We have girls tennis, which is varsity and JV, and then we have a JV boys team. The girls team is currently 5-2 and sitting third in our Division 2. They've had a lot of rescheduled matches in the earlier part of the season due to rain because they can't play on the courts when it rains. So now they're a little behind on the number of games that they're planning on playing this season, so they have a really packed week this week. They have 5 matches. I think they have like, I don't know. I've been talking to some of my friends on the tennis team, and it's a lot of travel and it's a lot of games, and I don't really know how you do 5 matches in 1 week, but
They already had one canceled this week.
so I don't really know what that means, but it's a very busy week for a tennis team. The JV boys tennis team has also had some pretty bad luck with cancellations due to weather, but they do have a home match this week against U32.
Softball, I also don't know much about softball. I do know someone who plays from Montpelier at U32. Last year, or when it flooded, we lost our softball fields, and we already had a very small roster and many injuries and just not a good season with numbers and weather. So this year, our softball is at U32 and they combine. They're doing quite well this season, currently 7 wins, 3 losses. They're ranked 7 in D2, and we just have a small group of Solons that travel to U32 to play with them. And they've had a few home games this past week.
And last but not least, for Montpelier High School sports, the track and field team is getting pretty close to the end of our season. We've got just 3 meets left until our D2 state championships, which are in June 6th at Burlington High School. Oh, yeah, it's 2 now. I wrote that like before
We
our
had a
last
meet
meet.
yesterday.
We had our meet yesterday at U32, which was great. There's a lot of stress in this part of the season because everybody's trying to make states qualifying marks, but it's a fun part of the season too because a lot of people are at their best point in terms of performing. We celebrated senior night yesterday at U32, and we got to take some pictures with the seniors and have them all come out on the track for a little moment of recognition. And next Saturday, we'll be going to Essex High School for New England qualifiers, which is a pretty high level and competitive meet where pretty much all the best athletes in the state go to try and qualify for New England championships, which I believe this year are in Massachusetts. Maybe Connecticut? I don't know.
This year, Race Against Racism is different than in the past years. I'm actually really excited because in every past year, it's always on a Saturday and I can never go. So this year, it is during school on Friday. It's the 30th of May, and it is organized by Club Action. There are some really engaged and passionate students in this group that are really excited and have worked really hard for many months on preparing this. And just a couple days ago in our TAs, we were looking at the different workshops. I think you gave your top 3 in a Google form and you aren't guaranteed your first choice. And I believe the schedule goes like you either have lunch, make lunch, have lunch.
I have no idea.
Make or have lunch and then go to a workshop or the other way around. And I'm really excited to see what it looks like this year. And the hope was for Race Against Racism that this year it could be that Friday educational event for the students and the teachers, and then the Saturday would be the traditional Race Against Racism, the 5K run or walk. But they weren't able to raise enough money for that, and their hope is for next year it'll be a 2-day event so they can have this again, and then the actual race or walk this Saturday.
The workshops look really cool. There's some drumming and folk singing, and there's migrant justice education and discussion groups and film and discussion. I think it looks pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Is that just students or is that open to the community?
I think in terms of participation, it's just for the school. Yeah. But we have the people who are going to come teach the workshops are from I think all around the state.
Yeah, that went into a lot of the fundraising, paying the people to come and educate the students in different groups.
And last for this presentation, Pizza for the People was going to be on Friday, and because it's been raining so much, it's been moved to June 6th. This is an event, it's annual. Do you know how many years we've been doing this? 4 or 5? 3 or 4. It's been happening the past 3 or 4 years. Basically for a day we have a half day of school, and then we go outside and there's a bunch of student performers who do music and poetry and There's free pizza, which our cooking class makes, and there's club tables, so like we get to learn more about what clubs at this school are doing around. And it's just time to like come celebrate the end of the year and the warm weather, hopefully warm weather, and just like have fun together for a little bit and have a little break from school. And that's it. Is there any questions about what's going on at this school right now?
Is there a concert tomorrow night?
There is also a concert tomorrow night, yes. And it's the end of year Pops concert, which I don't know why I forgot to put on here. But we have choir, concert choir and chamber choir, and we have bands, and we have orchestra, and there are also senior solos for choir.
And I did not put the Ren Star testing that's happening this week on. It's just not exciting. It's just happening.
It's just happening.
But the concert is here at 6 p.m. tomorrow, so.
Anyone can go to that, right?
Yeah, anybody who wants.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other questions? Great. Thanks so much, Amani, Miriam.
That was great.
Okay, and then next up we have our training with Jess Murray.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, I sent you my slides. Is that
Yes, you want me to Vanna for you as well?
is that okay?
I can definitely.
There's a lot of animations in it because I love a good animation, so you'll be clicking a lot. So I apologize.
That's perfectly fine. I
that
too
through.
appreciate a good animation. Let me just get to the beginning of it, and I think even if I'm in view only, I can probably still do the slideshow.
I think so. Are you guys okay if I stand? Is that weird?
Sure, as long as they can hear
Whatever works for
you
you.
with the mic. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay. Is this the right starting point?
This is the right starting point.
Okay.
Great. Well, thanks, folks. So we're going to be diving into interactional and institutional equity over the next like 50 or so minutes. Some of our goals tonight is to gain more understanding of how inequities operate and looking through inequities and oppression through like different levels of our society to get a better understanding of how they operate and how they impact kids at school. Understanding how our identities influence how we understand equity and inequity, right? Like knowing that we see the world through the lens that we have, right, and our lived experiences. So that's really, really critical information to think through when you're starting to do equity work and really working to understand how inequities function in our society. And then we're going to apply some of that knowledge with some scenario work. So most of your time will be spent in small groups with one another rather than listening to me chat. Yeah, thank you. So the idea of tonight is really to think about how do we deepen the dialogue that we can have with one another and people in our community. Great, so somebody in our MRPS community said this beautiful quote that I want to share. We're learning how to take care of our community together through dialogue. And they said that when we were having a conversation about anti-racism and equity in our district. And I just really appreciated that lens of how we do equity work, right? It's us coming together, it's us talking through this and learning as we go collaboratively, right? And so if we deepen our understanding of how inequities function and how they operate, it better equips us to have better conversations with people, and we're better able to understand different people's perspectives. Thank you. So I'd like to throw up some community agreements. Ideally, right, these would be democratically created and we would create them together, and in the interest of time, I'm going to offer you the ones that we use as an administrative team. right? So I'll just go through them. The first one is around intent versus impact, and that gets to the idea of course, we want to hold ourselves accountable in this work, right? We want to do better when we know better, and we need to give each other grace. Like, we're gonna step in it sometimes, and that's just part of the work. So there's a balance there and a tension that always happens whenever we do anti-racism and equity work. Stay engaged even when you're uncomfortable, and with that, give permission to yourself and others to just have a collective breath. Like, it's okay to pause and just say nothing. That's really hard for us. In our capitalist society, it's really hard, right? And sometimes we just need to take a breath. Step up and step back, right? Think about how you can step into conversations that you may not traditionally step into, and then also provide space for folks who may be a little bit more reserved or need more time to process, to be able to give them space to do so. Accept non-closure, and with that, be curious and combat defensiveness, right? There's going to be always pieces of this work that we don't understand, we don't have lived experiences around, and that's okay, right? That's part of the beauty of this work. And then again, with that, notice flushes. This is something that I learned from Nick Connor and really appreciated, this idea of like flushes, of like, you know, that moment when you just have emotion come over you. Think about like, stop, notice that, think about where you're feeling it, why you may be feeling it, and like what are the emotions behind that reaction. So just some community agreements while we do this work together tonight. So this is a semi-common sort of framework when we're thinking about anti-racism and equity work, right? And it's this idea, if you look at these cute little fish on the left-hand side here, that fish don't know, theoretically, right? Fish don't understand or know that they're in water, right? It's just part of who they are, right? It's just the world in which they live. And so their awareness of the water isn't great, because that's just the world in which they live, right? In a similar vein, things like racism, sexism, transphobia, sometimes are so normalized in the way that we experience the work, it can be really hard unless we intentionally try to understand them over and over and over again. It can be really, really hard to notice them, and really, really easy to just like think about it as natural and the natural state of the world. So that means, especially depending on your own lived experiences and identities, right, they may go unnoticed to you based on how you experience the world. So I'm gonna read this quote aloud. I'm not gonna ask you to react verbally to it, I just want you to react in your head. So I'll give you a little bit of an individual think time. And just as I read through, think about what are your initial reactions, and like how are you reacting, what emotions are coming for you. What is significant here is the notion that oppression often plays out unrecognized and unchallenged in schools, because it successfully convinces us that schools are neutral or non-oppressive and should not be taking a stand one way or the other on issues of oppression. Common sense does not often tell us that the status quo is quite oppressive. It does not often tell us that schools are already contributing to oppression, and it rarely tells us that schools need to place a priority on challenging oppression. So with that, right, sorry, I'm really bad at wait time. With that, right, I think this is a bit of a call to action for us, right? It not only talks about this idea of the fish analogy and how often we get so normalized to oppression that sometimes we can't even see it unless we're really trying to see it, but I think it also illustrates that schools are a really important place for us to attend intentionally to this work as part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, sorry. So this is one framework that is pretty common amongst a lot of equity folks. It comes from levels of racism and also like the social ecological theory. And what I really appreciate about this is it breaks down the different levels of our society and helps us see how they interact in order to create the cycle of like reinforcing oppression, or potentially, right, it helps us understand how to disrupt that, right? So the idea is we have 3 basic levels. The first one is like the big overarching global and national level, right? So when we're at that level, we're thinking about things like the fact that the US has a history of institutional and systemic discrimination and things like housing, education, employment, and healthcare, right? That we have some nationally held really negative stereotypes of people of marginalized identities, and that there's pretty clear messaging that is happening at the national level around anti-racism and equity work, right? For example, we have people in power denying things like implicit bias exists, right? And that is going to directly filter down into our local community level, right? Here in Montpelier, that is impacting the way that people are coming to the table, the way that we are seeing anti-racism and equity efforts, right? That filters into our collective brains, right, in our community and influences how we react, right? And I think going back a few years, another good examples of that interaction is with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? There was really clear negative commentary at the national level around Black Lives Matter that was really connected to some unfortunate stereotypes that we have of people of color in the United States, right? And so that, when the Black Lives Matter flag was raised, directly impacted the way that communities responded to that flag being raised, right? There were lawsuits asking schools to take it down. And so I think that's a really clear example of how sort of national norms and what's happening at the national level impacts the community level, right? And then again, right, that directly impacts the day-to-day, impacts how we as individual humans experience day-to-day life, experience our interactions with others, right? Because those stereotypes or those mindsets then filter and impact the way that I'm interacting with individual people based on how they're coming. So if we click one more slide. Right, the way that we frame this or talk about this in our anti-racism and equity strategic plan, if y'all have read that, is around institutional and interactional equity, right? These 2 things get at the idea of how those 3 levels interact with one another in order to create this like reinforcing cycle of oppression within our society. Right, so we know that at the institutional level, we're talking about things like discrimination in healthcare that leads to trans folks having far less access and worse health outcomes, right? And how that leads to our interactional equity around those individuals having a hard time, right, accessing healthcare. Right, so, or something like, employment discrimination happening for folks of color, and then that those decreased outcomes for those marginalized identities influence and reinforce negative stereotypes that then impact the interactional person-to-person level, and then those negative stereotypes make it seem like those outcomes are natural rather than a product of discrimination. Does that make sense to folks? So I think that that cycle and those sort of levels of oppression that exist are really, really helpful to know and help us break down how do we actually do something about this, right? Because it gives us a frame of reference. Like, yes, the national impacts our community and that impacts the individual, but we also see then, right, that the individual and the community can impact one another in really, really powerful ways. So, one example, and this is a made-up example, so know that, this is going to be Kevin. Kevin's the name of my brother, so just so you know where I got the name Kevin. This is where a lot of the clicking comes in, if I'm being honest. So what we're going to do is we're going to see Kevin come in in a pre-K to our system, right? And then we're going to follow Kevin up through post-secondary and see how things that are happening at the national or institutional level will impact him and his individual experiences over time. So again, looking at the institutional and interactional, like the interplay between them. The first of many clicks. So again, pre-K. So this is Kevin again, right? He is coming to us. He's a student from a lower socioeconomic status household, right? Some financial instability he's coming to kindergarten or pre-K with, right? And because of that, we know that students sometimes who come from families who have less privilege financially come with less academic vocabulary, right? And so the narrative then, if you don't mind, right, he comes in and is immediately seen as behind at school, right? By no fault of his own, right? By no fault of his parents. This is because of the way that classism plays out, right? He is coming to us with less academic vocabulary. Two different things there. So he's at UES, right? 1st through 4th grade. Now Kevin is known as behind, right, because he comes with less academic vocabulary, which sometimes is the case, right? Not always. He is more likely to be labeled as low by adults and seen as potentially having a disability. Even if he gets to grade level, that's something that sort of like sticks with him and his narrative about how we talk about Kevin. So now, because of those institutional inequities that he and his family are facing, right, he's now at Union a little wise owl and is known as being behind and low, and then people make assumptions about him potentially having a disability or trauma in his background, even if he doesn't. So now, middle school Kevin, right, so he's not as academically successful, and that's the assumption that folks are making about him, right, which means he's more likely to be seen as defiant and disruptive at school, right? So we know students who aren't seen as academically capable, even if they have the same behaviors as their peers, are more likely to be seen as defiant and disruptive, even with the same behaviors, right? So now Kevin is low and defiant, and he's not able to learn like everyone else, and maybe we're making some assumptions about his parents based on his academic struggles, which again all stem from his background, coming from a lower socioeconomic class. High school Kevin. All right, so now he's seen, right, he's a bigger kid, he's a bigger guy, right? Kevin is now seen as defiant and disrupted. He's more likely to be subjected to discipline and more likely to be suspended even when having the same behaviors as peers. And he's more likely then, because he is more likely to get suspended, that puts him at further risk of being really disengaged and potentially leaving school early, or as we traditionally say, drop out, right? So now he is defiant, he's dangerous, and maybe he's like, there's this theory that he's putting other people at risk just by existing and being a high school Kevin, right? Post-secondary. So if Kevin graduates, but we know he is potentially less likely to, right, because of some of the things he's experiencing. He graduates with fewer skills, he's less likely to become employed, live independently, or enroll in college, and he's more likely to live in poverty and become entangled in the criminal justice system. Right? And now we see some of the narratives or the stereotypes that we have in our society of people who aren't financially as stable, right? Now Kevin's poor because he is dumb, lazy, and makes bad decisions. So this is one example of a timeline for how this idea of institutional and interactional inequity, in this case, right, plays out over time and how it impacts students. A lot of information there. Mia, do you mind clicking? So yes, I just
Oh,
said what I
that's
was
the
gonna
wrap-up.
say
Got it.
at this slide. I was worried I was gonna forget to say that, so I added the slide. I nailed it. All right. So now what we're gonna do, right, we're gonna spend about 25 minutes in groups, and you're gonna be working to apply some of your new learning. So I have a really fancy little outline for you to guide some of your work, right, and it breaks down the global national level, the community level, and the individual level, and gives you some prompts. And you're going to be assigned a group, as you can see, and a scenario, right? So you have an email to the school board from a concerned community member around something or the other, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to work to dissect this email and really think about what are the different factors at play here, right? So we're going to break down the scenario, dissect it through this lens of national, community, and individual level, with the hope being, right, this will give you better understanding of where this person is coming from, what might be impacting the way that they're coming to the table, right, to help us really consider how would you start to approach this conversation based on your new knowledge, hopefully new knowledge, of anti-racism and equity. Clarifying questions before I hand things out. Okay, easy crowd, thank you.
I'll come to you, Jim. There's a seat down there. Thank you. Casey, do you want to?
I pulled it up.
Oh, actually, if one of you could just call him, do either of you, you have his cell phone number? If one of you can just call him, then you can just have him on speakerphone with the two of you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that works best.
Does that work for you?
And I'll filter in and rudely interrupt your conversations as I do so.
Adults
So I'll take this one?
have
Sure, that works for me.
I need Jake's.
Yeah. You have Jake's number.
Share Jake's.
Yeah.
We were given one. Yeah, I think I did.
Yeah.
Do we have, are we just supposed to think about them, or are we supposed to write stuff down?
It is a note catcher, so you can think about it, and if it's useful, you can write it down. Did that answer your question, Amani? Did that answer your question? One thing as folks get started, I would encourage you to start with the national level and work your way down.
Okay.
It's current national
speak about some of this. What would you say? The state of all social or political contacts in our country.
Alright.
And what we believe is important. So obviously right now, I think that the climate is that we
Yeah, I think there's a lot of publicity right now that people are saying things like this and are saying working on bringing up the achievement level for everybody and efforts towards that is really just dragging people down.
standards in order to allow or like cutting marginal
Right, so definitely like
can you give the percentage of
I couldn't find a pen.
I think it indicated. So that's one thing I think I put here, to assume that like equity work standards.
How's our current climate impact?
In the letter or?
That, I think the goal, there's like I'm talking like
Yeah.
social and historically and socially, that's been kind of like
Narrative.
a narrative, and that would be influencing this letter.
Yes.
And also, it seems like
Well, there's clearly work
whatever
about
theoretical
like,
person is writing this is pretty misinformed about like the intention of these policies, and I would think that that would be that misinformation
There's confusion of
Might
equity.
do
the
that
kind
when
that's
we
being
get to the
intentionally spread.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I would say that's national just because
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who are spreading misinformation about these kinds of initiatives, like at national.
And I'm not sure we are looking for quality of outcomes. I think we're looking for equity of opportunity, which is different from quality of outcomes.
Right. Right.
So there's some misunderstanding.
Historically, I guess the department of ag and parents have the power in schools to make decisions. And currently, it seems to be the federal government.
I think before we leave that person, I think I'm just going to throw it over to him. Well, it just seems that like this kind of stuff, like there's an important conversation in here that's hard to parse out because it's often like in, I don't know if you have like a social media level of like 2 seconds to get your outrage and shock or instead of like saying, okay, well, you might have a concern about it. Kind of like
I said, as part of this decision-making power, is that
that's right.
some federal policy on it.
Political climate, but I feel like
State policy, local policy, disparities.
Right.
Teacher that should create systems.
So decisions are at the federal and state level.
The local level.
What kind of decisions would be at the local level?
Well, I think a lot of decisions about what
Okay, so this is correct.
school districts do and have tradition of.
No, I think mission. So like, decided maybe in the federal government set counter course standards, right?
Yeah.
And then how did the state interact with those? I know how we did, because we have now just pulled
Yeah.
our priorities. There's something kind of seems like that.
The way the state interprets it, like the state has, for instance, like the British standards, there's state requirements. So the state has a layer of standards that parents have. And then, but even if the board has limited space on policy, what it chooses to spend money on, what it invests on, those have, enormous impacts.
What water?
Are you hiring, water?
Yeah.
Teachers, are you getting?
Yeah, but specifically if we're talking about having somebody who's opposed.
Yeah, feels a little too
Like,
close.
It really, yeah.
You know,
I mean, like,
folks who are not getting long-term support.
Right,
I think that
so budget and.
I'm the kind of person who they're writing
Yeah, what
about
historical
being
social
and
political
how it is, but I don't feel like
Is
it's
that-
ever, you know, as
as a current national
also having an identity as like a high school student, I don't feel like that's ever
I
happened.
mean, it's very immediate.
Another,
The language of this, you're like attacked by your own government.
I suppose
Yeah.
that could be a bias to lead me towards
Being
being
like
accurate with the
expressive,
person, but
but
I'm not.
our government is
Yeah.
aggressively targeting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
integration.
And having your own government
So I
target you that way
recently
makes it
really
really scary, right? And rightly so.
And she brought with her.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Rights for women have changed since the. So.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of the language in that letter was very action, like, I want these things, you know, I didn't do something, I want to push back, I want, like,
You know, it's like you forget. You really have.
Yeah. very, how can you use the power that you have to push back? Because I'm feeling scared from my job is feeling scared.
Wages were 59 cents.
Use your power
Kids are.
as a school board member to.
Over 6 months pregnant, you couldn't, I mean,
Actually,
it's just like, you know, enroll for school.
I think someone from the exact same demographic who has a kid who achieves really well.
Of the list.
Kind of, you know.
Yes, and it's like losing
Lies
some.
around the historical decision-making power.
Struggles.
Yeah, so I don't feel like
A massive
I was
shift
ever my identity
Correct.
towards the
in time, like that
people
shift
saying
is.
things like this. Just kind of look at it as a.
Yeah, there were assumptions about where that power and where the
Yeah.
controls were that.
Exactly.
Saying that.
Yeah. Somewhat regardless
Yeah.
of your,
To me, it feels pretty quickly like we should stop.
I mean, and I know that like
Sure.
certain, you know, certain backgrounds, you might have larger slices of the pie, where of course for the kid for a variety of reasons, large slices of the pie, you know, where it doesn't for other.
The second group of questions
But
about where decision-making power,
To react
I think a lot
badly
of
to
people
this.
think
going back to the board, I think historically maybe we were, it was sort of a balance of federal and state government, like there was sort of a triad.
Age.
And now I feel like
My gender. I would add.
while there's this
Current, you know, go back and identify.
toxic thing happening,
And I think that
I do think that the state and local
And
government
maybe
has some decision-making power.
I don't.
Probably not the right approach. But in my head, I'm already, you know, like designing.
Mentioned, right?
And
From
my,
Yeah.
Right, let's see like an example.
I'll be
of what
honest, like
happened in
the
Maine,
last
right?
couple elections,
Yeah.
I approached this
When the
like,
governor fought back, and then the entire state suffered.
I think
Right.
2 years ago, the instinct would have been to kind of special school, give them a little lunch. And I think that's.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and that's how.
Yes. Yeah.
In health counseling, you figure out how do you enter a
Yeah,
conversation.
because I'm not sure.
There's
There's enough here that.
this whole like pushbacks.
I think there's some happening.
You know, what are you gonna do to,
Right, so some of it's not having.
how are you gonna use your power to stand up to this?
Of like, it's
Right.
not
This is we all just need to unite behind this thing. We're gonna
And
do it.
I think there
That
is
doesn't feel
some
very
truth to the
either.
narrative that the kid who's compliant.
Our problem is people are doing them.
Especially if you've got an environment
But a lot of
where
times, you just
kids are playing sort of
they got
Right.
but if she's Lily's fine. So maybe the parent is
One
one
thing
thing
I
really
learned
wants
was
something that really wants it to work. And, you know, just because it's easy floors and the cold.
Yeah, it's,
I do
and like
think
a lot of
it's
times
sort of like
it's.
about, so in what ways are my identities impacting my understanding, right? So like,
And they
So at the community.
I'll be the first to admit that like when, as much as I didn't sleep,
I totally get that, and it does mostly just seem like, I feel like our district just
I
like
found this understanding
what I'm doing. But I think that's why I was saying
it's
this
this
way
white females that I have this structure
probably
I'm gonna be okay. It's on her response. That's her.
Yeah.
Social services. I'm gonna be okay.
I think that's exactly what it is.
That was my right or wrong, and not in like a secure way.
There's one
sort of like
this letter that
it's from a
it's
safety.
written a
I'm
lot.
making myself unsafe, right?
Certainly.
So it's hard to tell if this is a concern
Yeah.
that the person
Yeah,
has.
so it feels like, you know, there's sort of this
Or if it's something that actually experienced.
buffer or feeling of removal, right? I'm not lesbian, I'm not raising a trans child, so
That's important.
I can't exactly
I would also say like
relate. I
It's
certainly
very
feel
clear.
like I didn't have a but
have on my child.
my identity is.
But a lot of it is, yeah.
But it doesn't say that their child, that their
I
child.
also think that would be important.
upper middle class white man, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
tick all of the boxes of
Right.
like
Or thinking.
the privileged
Things like
identities,
this.
and
That might inform like how you would respond to that.
what do we do
We
with that
approach.
privilege? I
Right.
guess is
Right.
like,
Right.
where was this question here? What groups
Right.
have the power to influence?
How do you feel like, yeah, how do you feel like
Someone who
yeah.
is in, who ticks all those privileged identity boxes, like, does that mean that I have more,
That's okay.
that I'm more able to like stand up for the people that don't have power? And then if I do that, am I like taking their voice?
It feels, I think.
And I have a non-binary child, so does it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was expecting economic pain. I was in like staff schools and all this
That's because like I know versus the fact that like these are new
horrifying.
programs.
Maybe like how they're seeing what
This
is
is something that's never been done that any school this person has known about before.
They might be, I mean, I think you're on earlier, they might not actually be. This letter might not be too actually.
Well,
It's experience.
and as you said, like the strategy, knocking down, I'm so glad the government did. It said also in court how they prevailed in court, but they still
They still suck. And people in Vermont suffer.
That's how this is how this works, right? If you
Just
don't
wait.
stand up.
When
Harvard did whatever.
I get it, totally.
So I think this is, you know, the language that this person's using is very much how do something, do something about it. And I did think too, because I feel like I've been on
That
this
actually
board
does make
for
me think, like, I think that what we've been talking about this, we've been
5 years.
saying a lot, like.
and there are community, you know, back to the power and influence,
But that's
there
not
are community
necessarily
members
true.
who are comfortable writing a note like this.
Because I was
and
talking
saying
about
these things.
people
They're community members
talking about
who I
students
don't
just
think, I
as
don't know that it would
they
occur to them,
really
I don't know if they would feel
know
comfortable
what's
with
going
it.
on.
The people that need this sort of like perspective and protection as much as anyone, so I do think there are.
Say actually is, but it's possible they do, and they have this opinion.
And the groups have power.
Central Vermont.
Oh,
And so I do think there are
Like,
some,
still have community.
you know, groups of our community that feel very
And
empowered
speak your
to,
mind.
to speak up
So
I
Tim,
mean, much less someone who's
really
conservative.
push us.
right, I was just gonna say, this person's not that.
Yeah.
Or at least is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
we are empowered, like, I mean, we both work in the state government. Like, I work at the one, you know,
It's more just
large
like.
institutional higher learning,
I mean,
really large. I mean, how I could text our congressperson right now, like how many people have the phone number of a congressperson.
except their groups
So,
are.
so there's like, there's some legitimacy to
Yeah.
the fact that we are privileged.
Yeah.
But I do think that,
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah,
talking
there's some
about
conservative
Yeah.
argument that
is sort of,
the schools.
yeah, whether they expand our schools and how these sort of initiatives are new and.
Yeah, there might be some questions about like how they'll bring some of
I
this.
agree with that, that it's kind of cool us to have some sort of a joint resolution and knock it off. Like that is something the school board could theoretically do, sort of join some sort of, I guess our Secretary of State has like just, file a lawsuit.
Right.
but I'm trying to think if there are sort of movements that we as school board members would be,
But somehow it's like,
able to
That kind of answers the start of the more time.
participate in. Hey, hi, how's it going?
I feel like at one point early
And I
in
can
the
see some of
administration,
this.
there was a national educational figure who was pushing back.
if you're not aware.
What organization
Getting
it was
some
and what specific action it was.
Oh,
And the
like-
union guy was.
Yeah.
And if
But
you
also,
don't
I think
have
there
those
was some
experience,
rebuttals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good, yeah.
Yeah.
in managing
sure.
situations, you have a lot of practice.
Managing
And I
situations.
know I know more about
Like
this
when
at
you learn
the
about
legal
this
level
sort of thing.
with the APLU. I don't know what that stands for, but it's Association of Public Library Grants.
Sure.
Yeah, university. So that's a nationwide.
So then,
They are-
now that we've gotten that out of the way.
Yes.
And universities in blue states as well.
I think you did actually. You.
And I would imagine there's a similar level
It's like,
among
it is
some
easier for us
public
because
school
we have,
Right.
kids in the schools to look through this.
organizations that work with
Yeah.
public schools. But I don't
This, I believe this kind of education where there's like versus curriculum, et cetera, has been.
Yeah, this one became hitting very close to home, that's why we're,
Number
we're
two.
number two, so we're the,
Yeah.
Somebody
yeah,
sees that.
it's happening all the time.
And so without joining the state to their, I would have access to their responses.
Right, to do, right, right.
I also would maybe this is going way too far. Someone just saying, but how is it?
Yeah, I want something specific about what you're gonna communicate to my kid and the other students that are sick now.
And it makes me feel like school is a
Yeah,
safe place, place where
I think, right, I think particularly right now, people are looking for whatever buffer they can put between themselves, like, who
Yeah.
is the wall? And
Yes.
I think in a lot of ways, it's like, we're the wall, right, for a lot of people in our community right now. To say like, we care about your kid, we want them to be here, we welcome them, like they can be who they are and who they authentically are in our space.
Yeah,
I think that's a lot of what folks want right now.
yeah, yeah.
There's another,
Them, and I think there's a lot of distressed of people in power,
Yes, yeah,
including, I think, all of us who are people
Right.
in power, right?
right, exactly.
I wrote that down, but we are the wall, because I appreciate that it sort of ties into the conversation we were having before about the fact that, like, we are
like, kind of like Boston, it's
sort of obliged to
but
lean into that privilege.
Oh, okay. That's our record.
Make up for the fact that
You're on the right track.
Yeah, and I think talking about veterans, again, there had been sort of a shared responsibility,
It's
federal,
not about
state,
decreasing
local.
trial.
And now the federal is like attacking, like literally attacking. And so, yeah, then it's like then the next buffer is the state and then the next buffer is the school board. And those balances don't feel like they're in place anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it is.
And yeah, we all feel really powerless. Like, this is a very
Yeah, I think the lived
take
experience
action.
we have.
I'm scared and I'm scared for our students. And what are you gonna do about it? Do something.
When people like us are able to talk kind of academically,
Totally get
and this is someone who,
this is but as we're talking, the disequilibrium came to my mind, like, that's how I kind of
Yes.
feel like.
Cognitive dissonance. Yeah. Yeah.
In this moment, like, there had been this equilibrium between the state's responsibility and local and federal, but now, like,
Right.
And you could lose this or we'll take it back, or you could change. And so everything that you sort of thought you could have at least like a ramp to adjust to, it's all, I think disequilibrium is like a great word for right now.
I'm sure I didn't spell it correctly.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've been trying to do more is being really clear with folks around where my values are and how I come to the table because people aren't trusting people in power right now. It makes it even more important for us to be like, this is who we are, like this is how we're going to treat your child. Because people need that like constant reinforcement when they hear somebody we can trust, like we care. So that's something I've been thinking a lot with
That's another actually thing to think about. It may be but it's like, what is
And we're the ones who use the words, which are.
There might be that song in Hazel's. That's what I thought you were going to say. We are the wall keeps us free.
As you started to sing it, I was like, where have I heard that before?
I think there could be
Spent a lot of time with the Hating Town soundtrack.
a real inclination to explain what we're doing instead of actually asking about it.
Well, does, yeah.
This is why, this is why DEI and anti-racism are good. This is why it's beneficial to really asking
There was this
concerns
timeline
about their kid.
that's super accelerated, right? So like as like a cis woman with a daughter who's a teenager,
What they're seeing in the
like
classroom.
thinking about high school and college experience and having women feel attacked because of that abortion issue, lack of healthcare in women's depending on what state you happen to be in. May die or may die. And now that isn't even close to the most extreme of what's happening. It's going to take a long time to look back. Like now that feels like, oh, that's quaint. Like that was done. Yeah. 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 I think I'm glad that she said that. This is where I had, again, where my assumptions tend to sort of not step into power, but like have a say. It just gets rid of the valiant and awful person because you're looking for some sort of reassurance. I think sometimes it's like we're trying to like keep business as usual when we're gonna.
All right, folks, I'm gonna pull y'all back. Sorry to interrupt.
Bill and educate them on the stage.
Yeah. It's like answered all of them.
And more than once.
It's been really bad.
Yeah.
I've got some,
Yeah.
at least.
I know.
Did that work out okay? Jake?
Yep.
We have one more slide.
Yep, I was looking for you.
Technology
See it
wins.
coming up.
Technology wins.
Technology wins. It's pretty simple technology. You ready for me to do it?
I'm ready. Yes. Thank you for checking. I appreciate that.
This is the,
Oh no, not that slide.
this
There we
one.
go. That
This
slide.
one.
That was supposed to be hidden. So Google
see it.
Slides. What are we doing? All right. So as we debrief, right, we don't need to do a huge share out, but I am curious. What are folks leaving with today? Like, especially when we were thinking about how do we want to use this knowledge to create better dialogue with folks and create connection rather than division. What are folks leaving with today?
I can start. I think what you said really helped encapsulate with the spirit of our conversation, which is I really appreciate, was that being on a school board like this is a position of power, and even though we may not have the answers and we might feel sort of powerless ourselves, that if we continue to sort of reinstate and share our values often and clearly, to provide that reassurance, that what we can provide for reassurance about what our values are as like a district and a community, is a valuable thing we can do from the position we're in.
Thank you, Jill.
I think for me, I just appreciated the opportunity to talk with other board members about it. I mean, it's not something we often do, and I don't have kids in the school, so I don't have all the connections that other people on the board have with each other. So it's really nice to be able to talk about it with people.
I would say that context always matters, and you know, without sort of dialogue, it's hard to have empathy in any direction that you're looking, or you know, any perspective that you're expressing. Without dialogue, there's no way to sort of get outside of any particular perspective, which is rooted in a context specific to that perspective.
Context is really important. Then I think also looking for like what are folks' values, right? Because by and large, right, as humans, we have very similar values when we come to the table. So looking for like what does this person value, and what is the context in which, right? And usually it's something like, I really care about my kid, like I really want them to have opportunity, I want to protect somebody, right? And that's something I think we can all agree on.
I think also our lived historical experience has a big influence on our understanding of the problem.
I feel like that was kind of a mic drop, so I'm going to leave us there. But yes. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jess.
Oh, sorry, one last thing. I do have an exit ticket. It'll be sent to you in about 5 minutes. And that's just as part of your policy around equity for the board, right? You do need an annual equity training. So it's just a little exit ticket to get a sense of what do you think your needs are as a board regarding anti-racism and equity, your wants, and then your hopes for trainings. So, no pressure, you don't have to do it like now.
Please don't do it now.
Don't do it now. But yeah, it'll be in your mailbox.
Yeah, tomorrow's fine. But thank you very much, Jess. We appreciate you guiding us through this
Yeah, thank you.
as we all figure out our way.
Have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you. All right, speaking of, we are going to move along to the discussion kicked off by the Operations Committee about fund balance and capital projects.
Kind of dry follow up on that one.
Wait, I thought it was Scott. No, just kidding.
I left my presentation.
So I'll take this one and report out from our most recent Operations Committee meeting. We've been talking about a couple things, sort of the significant fund balance that we've been carrying for the past few years, and some persistent capital needs at our in some of our different facilities. I mean, one of the things that I think we've had in our heads is hearing about UES and MSMS and the windows, and I still have images of people trying to hoist the windows up on steamy hot days and whatnot. And so kind of thinking about those two things at the same time, we have a pretty sizable fund balance currently. As of the end of fiscal 24, it was about 3.4 million. We've got about 400,000 assigned to the track, about 50,000 assigned to the net zero study. But about 3 million is there, and we're no longer using that funds to offset, to buy down the budget. So, on some level, I think our thinking is that we should think about utilizing it for some of our, one-time capital needs. We also were looking at our reserve policy and thinking that, we have an environment right now, particularly coming from state and federal governments, that is pretty fraught and has a lot of uncertainty. So in some ways, we do want to preserve some measure of flexibility because who knows what's coming down the pike at us. So we currently have a reserve policy set. It's, I think it's framed as a goal of 2% of the approved budget. So, you know, of that 3 million or so, that's about 600,000 that we would target as a reserve policy. So what we were thinking of, that's kind of the background. What we were thinking of we were toying with a couple things. At one time, we were talking about maybe developing a formal policy about, you know, reserves, having sort of different tiers of reserves. Got a little complicated, and consistent with the idea that we want to preserve some flexibility, we thought, well, let's just try and really target the fund balance that we have and think about how best to use it for the district and the taxpayers. So what we wanted to propose to the board for discussion is to up our target for reserves from 2% to 4 to 5%, at least for the time being. That would take that $600,000 and move it up to about 1.3 to 1.6 million-ish. I don't have exact numbers, but that's the ballpark. And that would leave us around $1.5 million in the fund balance. And you know, about this time is when Tom is really kind of starting his planning for what he's going to do as he's preparing his facilities plan. And we thought it would make sense to direct that $1.5 million to the capital fund to, you know, and when I say direct, the technical term that Christina told us would be we would assign it. We would say these funds are for the capital fund. That's not an irrevocable action. It's not something that couldn't be undone. But the point would be to signal to Tom and the community basically that, you know, we want to dedicate these funds to capital improvements. We want them to, you know, have Tom to have an idea of what we want to dedicate to capital improvements as he's developing his plan, so that it can be there can be a sort of orderly evaluation of our needs and what would make the most sense. You know, and we could have a presentation of that in the facilities report, and that would be a good time for everybody to comment. You know, does this make sense? All that business. And generally, I think we felt that, you know, just sitting on a big balance isn't really best practice, and rolling it forward. You know, this money really kind of came about in COVID when we weren't using money for subs and other things, and I think it can be impactful for some of our long-term needs, and we thought that, you know, this would be a idea worth bringing to the whole board. Just for comparison, I think we put, was it 270,000 we put to the capital fund in this year's budget. I think that's been the consistent. Maybe it goes up in the next year in some planning to about 3. So this is pretty impactful for what we usually put into the capital fund budget. It's 5x of an annual spend, and I think maintaining those contributions to the capital fund is a really good, prudent idea. You know, it means that we don't have to bond as frequently and saves us, of course, the interest costs on that. So, you know, and I'll stop in a minute and ask my fellow committee members to chime in with anything I'm missing, but we're not asking the board to vote on anything today, and we still want to make sure that Libby and Christina and Tom and team all have an opportunity to, you know, think through the details of this and, you know, what we might be missing. Is this workable? Is it practical? Are there other things that we're just missing? But we wanted to bring it to this board and just get thoughts and impressions, and if this is an idea worth pursuing. So I'll defer to Casey, Jake, and Scott if there's anything they'd like to add or amend.
The one I just wanna, I don't know if you said this, but the raising, so we're at a goal of 2%. And that 4 to 5%, that came from Libby and Christina as a goal that they would feel comfortable with.
Oh, good, okay.
It wasn't just something we pulled out of the air, and so we wanted to make sure it was something that was based on, you know, what they felt comfortable with. And then also the other thing I'll add is that all of our conversations have been with Libby, Tom, and Christina, which has been great because we can then just in real time bounce ideas off of each other. So we're not just going off into la la land with these crazy ideas that board members come up with. Hopefully the ideas are rooted in something a little bit more sane.
Yeah, Tom's got a big list.
Shake one off me.
Oh, yeah.
I was just gonna agree with those guys, that we should get to work on some capital stuff with the money that we have in fund balance.
I like the idea of raising what we keep in the fund balance. I think we're in really uncertain times, and it would be good to have that available in the future, especially since we're not really sure what's happening with funding and a whole lot of other things. And I will say, I'm a little reluctant to put a lot of money into our buildings, given that we have no idea what's going to happen. So, you know, a huge capital investment in the buildings is probably not something I would vote for. I mean, obviously, things that need to get taken care of due to safety or things deteriorating, of course, I want those to happen. But I feel like we have to take a cautious approach because we just don't know what's going to happen yet.
I've got Jim and then Jill.
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of those sentiments. You know, we don't know what's happening with the legislature and funding. You know, some of the developments out of the Senate have indicated that there's a lot of education that needs to happen there. And there also seems to be a reluctance to make some hard decisions about some of the drivers of cost, which is concerning. So obviously, you know, we've had jarring incidents recently, and you know, all the cushion we have against jarring incidents, I think, is needed. And then I think there's, you know, very real possibilities that there will be some sort of reconfiguration soon, and between that and also doubts about this location given the flood risks, you know, we don't want to be in limbo too soon, but I think the next couple of years is not a great time to sink money into buildings that we don't need to, given the uncertainty around the future.
Jill, and then I put myself on the stack for a question.
So I had just two, I think, pretty straightforward, a question and a comment maybe. Just a clarifying question. So in the past, when we've gotten sort of a facilities update, there's sort of a, you know, different fiscal years, and this year we're going to do the windows, and this year we're going to do the roof. Is the idea of this that we would invest more into that sort of thing? How does that interact with that table we used to look at? That like each year we plan out for the next few years more than we had been?
If it's the table I'm thinking of, it's kind of a pay-go table at this point. I'm not 100% sure the table is, so let me just caveat it with that. But if it's the one I'm thinking, I do think it's sort of, we work to the end. Like then, you know, we have $270,000 going in, so we find $270,000 of basic maintenance, like capital improvement maintenance that we can do. At the same time, the facilities report kind of is separate, and you know, at least as long as I've been following conversations with the board, the windows are coming next year, or right. You know, like they're always there. But then because it moves over to this table, where there's only $270,000 available, or like this year the roof I think ate it all up from that, right. From when there was the leak. So the point here would be to to try and provide some of that work that's been on the docket for a number of years, but has been
Deferred.
pushed out because of that cap. And as Tom was kind of explaining it to us, you know, all points very well taken, particularly like around the building that we might not use, but it's hard, I think, it's hard for anyone to envision a scenario where like a UES isn't being used
Right.
to serve, you know, kids in this area. And so where it might not be a great idea to do something here, you know, that where there's greater risk, something there like windows that's been on the agenda for years, maybe a better idea.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually was the second sort of point I was gonna toss in there is I mean, the thing with real estate and buildings for the most part is that they are an asset. It's not just money that gets spent on windows and then it disappears. Like now you've got a building that has, you know, modern windows. I do sort of worry a little bit about this particular building because of the flood, but I agree. I don't think, you know, reasonable investments in those other two buildings will necessarily be a net loss. I think it just makes them more valuable property for whether we use them or whether we sell them. So I'm not necessarily as opposed to that.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought so.
thank you.
You're welcome. Just so that everybody's working, I just pulled up a version, oops, sorry, from a budget presentation.
All right, so like the windows are
think
like
from
over
last
several
year.
years. See the like UES window replacements, MS, and it's like, it's sort of broken up over years and.
Right, and as
Thank you.
Tom was saying, that kind of makes things more expensive long run.
Mhm.
You know, if you're doing a couple of windows now, a couple of windows then, rather than mobilizing. So part of the idea here is giving Tom the signaling to Tom scope of effort for reasonable planning, so we can kind of get a sense of like what does how does a substantially more money in that chart allow you to do what you believe is necessary to, you know,
Keep the buildings functioning.
particularly ones where there'll be no regrets, like a UES, where we don't see any reasonable prospect that that's going to be not used for the benefit of students.
I can't remember who said it in the meeting, but the remark was, we have kids in those buildings now, right? So the money invested in those buildings is going towards the kids that are in there now.
And our staff, yeah.
And our staff.
Mhm.
And the point that Joe was making, that those are community assets. And if ultimately there aren't kids in the building in the future, the value is still retained within the community. And I think there's some uncertainty about if we keep it as a reserve and then there's merging of districts, then those resources could be taken out of the community.
No. Okay, so I've got myself and then Jim. Anybody else on the? And then Rat. Okay. So I just had two questions. One is a process one. What are you hoping for out of tonight?
You know, the administration's continuing to think about this. I would like to hear what, you know, if folks think this has legs for us to try and make a push to maybe get to a point where we might want to take a vote before summer recess on assigning funds. If it's a non-starter at the board level, that tells us go do something else. But you know, the four folks on the operations committee, I think it's fair to say, all thought this was a reasonable thing to pursue, and so you know, we really just didn't want to get too far down the road if we were off, outside of where the full board was.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my question about the content here is, let's say hypothetically we put the roughly 1.5 million into the capital fund and we've upped the target for our reserve holdings to now 4 to 5%, which sits at about 1.5 million. Let's say hypothetically we need that money for something. What do we have a process for saying, oh, we actually have to draw down now from our savings and go below what our target reserve level is? Do we know what we do then?
So, no, and I would want to have Christina and Libby
Okay.
here for that. And you know, that'll be something, I'll take that note back to ask and try and understand that. But a couple points were made about the assigning funds. We can assign funds and then unassign them.
Right.
So
Right.
once they're in there, I think we're not crossing a Rubicon. We're not
Yeah.
doing anything that's irrevocable. We're really signaling to Tom that we're serious about this and we want him
Yeah.
to be thinking about this as he prepares his facilities report.
I think one example that Tom gave us around like his ability to plan is if he knows that he's going to have the resources to replace all of the windows in UVS
Yeah.
and MSMS, he can buy them all at once
Yeah.
at a reduced cost, store them, and then over several summers do the work.
Mm-hmm.
And so having those resources and being able to plan can be more strategic, allow that strategic piece.
Yeah.
And then ultimately save the district money.
And in that case, in my hypothetical scenario, that money is no longer simply assigned, it's also been spent.
Yes.
So then we would actually no longer have it.
Yeah.
We would have to, I just want to know what our process is for, in general, I think this is a smart use of a large reserve, which is what I see it as is investing in the assets that we have, our facilities, so.
And if I could just make one more point on that, we're not presenting a take it or leave it. There's a reserve target. We're happy to hear input and thoughts on that.
Oh,
There's
cool.
an
Okay.
amount that we're thinking makes sense to
Uh-huh.
put, but there's other numbers that exist out there, right? So I think this is
Yeah.
all open for discussion. We don't want anyone to think that this is like, this is the proposal and it's this or nothing.
Got
it.
That's helpful.
And on the point, one thing we did talk about in the operations committee, to your point, Mia, about changing course, we have 50,000 assigned for a net zero study, but I don't think I think that's been assigned for years now. And
Yeah,
hasn't really made any forward progress. And, the thought that we had is, well, let's do something that actually helps. Like instead of another study, holding this for a study that we don't know when we're gonna do, maybe spending it on something that we know will be more efficient, might not get us to net zero, but will be better,
Mhm.
is not a bad idea. So
Move in the direction, yeah.
we might want to talk about that assignment and wrapping that back in. And so I just wanted to signal that. It was a
Mhm.
topic that came up. We didn't make any decisions on it, but topics for conversation.
All right, so then Jim and then Rhett.
Yeah, definitely agree UES is I think a safe and needed investment, and also agree that we want to make sure that the experience of our students in this building now is worthwhile. How much are some of the, for instance, I think the future of MSMS is less certain than the future of UES. How much would the investments of the Windows and MSMS be something we could get back at some point if, say, we wanted to sell that building? Is that a cost that we would sink in and not recover, or is that something that would up the value of MSMS? And the second question is, if we wanted to increase the target of our reserve fund, do we have to take action to do that? Do we have to change policy to get it to 4? Or is that something we could just kind of agree on and set it and have it be a de facto kind of informal thing?
The way I view it, Jim, because we have a goal of 2, it's pretty squishy in the current policy. Like, we don't have a requirement.
Yeah.
I don't think that would foreclose us from having sort of a de facto practice of maintaining more. Right, essentially right now we have a de facto practice of having like a 10 or 12% reserve because we're carrying $3.4 million. So, if there was general buy-in and consensus that we wanted to have a more healthy than 2%, which I think there is, nothing about our policy would foreclose that. And part of, because I went down that road initially of you're laughing because I had our base level reserves, our second tier, I was getting all fancy with it. And I think because of some of the concerns that you're articulating about the need for flexibility, we all kind of thought, let's just not do that. and if we have an operating consensus.
Is there any argument to be made that if we had that number more formalized, that if, for example, the legislature looked for some sort of a clawback of money, that we would have a better argument for justifying keeping a certain reserve that was in line with the formal policy than if it wasn't?
I would think the devil's in the details of what, at this point, I wouldn't hazard any kind of guess based on the fact that everything I know about the consolidation is probably going to change tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, but it's a good point. Like, it's something to think about.
Yeah,
That,
I mean, if there's language like, number above this, number above like your policy required reserve needs to come back.
Yeah.
And if you've got 5 instead of 2, you're gonna keep a lot more of that money.
I mean, if we start seeing stuff like that, it'd be a bad idea to do that. And candidly, those concerns are kind of animating this discussion, that if we're sitting on a very large balance, there is a likelihood that it gets swept away. And if we're in a district, one of 5 districts in the state, maybe is nowhere near here.
Yep.
So,
That is possible. All right, Rhett, you're up.
Yeah, I was thinking about that policy mentions a minimum 2% goal, and I was thinking about doubling that or whatever we want to do, and wondering, like, is that because if we want to designate a lot of what we have right now, we want to just make ourselves have a little bit more? Is that a good reason for that? And I'm just asking questions out loud. On the other hand, my understanding is that the purpose of the reserve fund is for, like, things break. And then we have the money right now to fix it. There's a fire in a cafeteria or in a kitchen, and we need to replace, we need to spend $50,000 to replace some stuff. That's the purpose of that reserve fund. Does it need to be more than 2%? Is that reflective of the likelihood of more expensive breaking things? Or, you know what I mean? Like, or like, is it gonna help us in the event of a flood here, where we can't open the high school on, at the end of August? Or not, you know what I mean? Is it better, is it better utilized investing it in our buildings so that, I don't know. Those are these kind of questions, like, what's the purpose of doubling that number? And is it a good reason? Or is it just because we don't want to designate it?
I think the purpose of, stepping back and sort of why we're having this conversation, I think there's a feeling that the status quo of sort of just carrying forward the amount we have because that's the amount we have wasn't strategic or thoughtful. So we wanted to kind of step back from that and say, if we were trying to design this up from the ground, what would we want to do? And 2%, 600,000 seems reasonably, to your point, if something breaks, depending on what it is, there's oftentimes, there could be insurance, there could be other sources of funds, so it's kind of hard to say exactly like what purpose. I presume it's for some measure of cash flow needs and some measure of, oh shoot, something happened and we do need some extra funds. And some of it's probably just a little conservatism, right? In a budget, it's always good to have a little bit of extra on hand. Given that, it is an uncertain time, it did seem 2% felt light. And I don't know any other way to say it. And we were kind of deferring to Libby and Christina.
I see she did put herself on video, so she might be able to answer that question.
I think Tim's doing a great job. Fantastic, Tim.
I was waiting for you to bail me out.
I unmuted it a couple times, but I didn't need to interrupt. You're doing great. And we're stopped the rest stop, so I know my internet's not going to go out right now. So yeah, Tim's representing all of our conversations and Scott really well around what we've talked about in operations. And the board can make a decision whether you want to do that. You want to raise the policy number officially or not. I mean, because Tim's right. We have been kind of de facto having that amount of money, way above what the policy says anyway. I think when you look at the chart that Mia had up earlier, which is the accurate one that Jill was talking about, is that we don't have the money right now for the windows. So really, if that's a project that you as a board really decide we need to do for our schools, we need to go out and bond for it. Probably is the most likely scenario. Tom just got updated numbers for that, and they've doubled from when we got the original quote already, and that was 2 years ago. So just the windows alone for UES and MSMS are about $1.5 million just to buy the windows. That's not the work. That's just to buy the windows. So it's a pretty penny that we'd be spending. And I think with all the uncertainty that we're having, you know, if we're at 4 to 5% in our reserves, Christina and I would feel good with that. And you could always unassign things. You could always make that decision as a board. It doesn't need to be a huge deal. So I think Tim said, I'm not saying anything that Tim hasn't said. So he did a good job representing what our conversations are in the operations committee. Both Christina, Tom, and I all think this is a pretty good idea. Be more strategic with what we have in our capital fund. It got depleted, just to remind everybody, it got depleted because the MHS.
The roof, in case you can't hear what you say. Uh-oh. Texter. I'm texting her to let her know.
Which was so that's what depleted that fund. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Lou. So again, Brett, part of why I wanted to make the point that, you know, some of this is deferring to Christina and Libby. Some of this is sort of gut sense about what the uncertainty in the environment is and what we feel like a safe amount is. It could be, 5 to 6% or 7%. You know, I don't think any of us are going to be able to find a right number. It's judgment on that.
I hope that this is kind of bleeding into the 454 conversation, so I'm going to sort of bridge over a little bit. If this foundation formula is implemented in 2027, it's going to be pretty dramatic around the state. So I hope that doesn't happen. And part of what I'm hoping is that there's more movement on the district consolidation prior to the foundation formula, because then people have a sense of what we're getting into, and there's potential for some, budgetary changes based on different administrative costs, different costs of teachers sharing resources in different ways. I would hate to lose this money to other places that have greater needs in their facilities. You know what I'm saying? If there's a way that this money can kind of be utilized, it at least stays in this community. Whereas if we save it for the possibility of buying down tax increases, we might lose it for nothing and have nothing to show for it. So I think utilizing it is wise prior to all of this consolidation possibility.
Thanks. Any final thoughts before I ask Tim if he's got what, and the operations committee, if they've got what they need from the board, at least for now?
I have a question. So we had an energy report done a couple years ago, or a facilities report done. Did you guys use that at all when you were doing your work?
Yeah, I mean, we have one every year. Or are you talking about?
No, we paid someone
No,
to
the
do it.
Truex Collins did
The Truex Collins?
Yeah.
Okay. Not per se.
Could you all just double look at that before you?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think about was that prioritizing existing need? The big takeaway for me on that one was the giant price tag around the new high school.
Building a new high school.
So I guess was there something about specific needs at existing facilities in that one?
I think they went through each school.
Did they? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that.
They did,
I mean,
and.
it's been a
and-
long time since I read it, but
Okay,
I think they went through each school and talked about the age of like furnaces and stuff
oh,
like
yeah,
that. and-
okay.
Well, and Tim's right, Tom and Andrew before him does do that for us every year. So we have, that's it, that's also in the annual facilities report from
Yeah.
our facilities director.
So it's a good point to kind
Yeah.
of go dust that one off, look at sort
Cross-reference.
of where it's saying, and then, you know, in large part, I think that's a conversation that I see this move is kind of a first step to unlock that conversation, because if the direction to Tom is, you know, we're going to do, you know, about 300K this year, I think he would approach a facilities plan with that in mind to try and you know, get the best value out of that. And it would be a little different if we had this. So that's why I think kind of putting some money in the capital fund kind of lets him set about his work so that in the fall, it's fall, right? I think when we're looking at the facilities, then we can really have that conversation about, you know, what are the things, and then do we as a board think that's the right investment given what we know, which will probably have changed 10 times from now in
Yeah.
the fall.
I have one more thing. The net zero funds, I really think one of the bigger, a small, like kind of maybe a low-hanging fruit might be heat pumps in the hottest classrooms in the district. Maybe that's south-facing third floor at MSMS, wherever it is. That's one thing that, it shuts school down at
Yeah.
one point.
Right.
And you can deal with cold, but you can't do much with heat. You know, we can all bundle up and put on a hat and put on a scarf, and it's not as comfortable to write, but we can get through the day. If you have to shut down the school because it's too hot, that's an investment that's helping you potentially prolong the school year in certain spaces. You know, heat is a really, really challenging thing to overcome, and heat pumps can cool.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, that's a great idea.
It's true.
That's true. We'll definitely refer Tom. We'll have another meeting it'll be before the next, right? It's the first meeting of the month. We do it right before the full board meeting. So I'll bring that up.
Anything else you're hoping to hear from the board before?
So can I just maybe summarize what a potential takeaway is, and then you guys can either tell me no or yeah.
Sure.
We'll go back to the facilities, the operations committee, and say there seemed to be general support. If folks want to reach out individually or come to that operations committee meeting, if you think, you know, maybe we're being a little aggressive on what we're putting in the capital fund, maybe we're being a little whatever on any of the specific numbers, we're all up for hearing it. But barring anything else, we'll maybe bring a proposal to try and act on for a vote to assign funds before we go into the summer break. I think that would be the only action that would be needed, an assignment of funds to the capital fund. And then, if there's any specific asks to Tom as he plans, we can hear that at that time in a future meeting. Does that feel right to people? Okay,
Sounds good to me.
we'll do that at the next meeting. Thank you.
Great.
Picking this up.
Thank you, Operations Committee. Great, so then moving on to the legislation at the state level. When we thought to add this to the agenda, we thought the Senate would vote on where H454 is at, and I learned today quite likely they are not. Is that correct?
They at least put it off,
They've put it off,
at least till tomorrow.
Yeah.
Last I saw.
at least till tomorrow.
See, it's on there.
Good certainty. But the question is whether or not we as a board would like to take a position on this legislation, or on more generally
the question of education transformation in the state? And if yes or if no, is there any communication that beyond talking about it at board meetings and, Libby including it in her superintendent's reports just about every week, any other kind of communication we want to do with the community? So I think the first question is, do we feel like we have a position on where things are at?
I do.
I know you do, Jim.
It is on tomorrow's calendar.
So they may vote.
For second reading, with some, right.
Do you want to share your position?
I mean, I'm disturbed by what the direction is taking in the Senate, and I think that this board should be as well. It puts this district in a bind. It doesn't seem to address the deep structural problems. It certainly is way less thoughtful than the House bill in terms of looking, I think, hard at some of the, as Rhett was talking to, you want to know what you're funding before you fund it. And this just seems to, create panic in districts that are going to have to make major cuts like ours, and panic in other districts that are going to have huge tax increases that they're not expecting. Again, without addressing some of the underlying problems. I wrote to the senators. I don't want to call out anyone, but I got a disturbing response from one senator who basically said, "We just need something for the governor to sign." It's like, no, I think.
Oh, that's not good.
I think and I'm paraphrasing, and he or she would probably say it differently, but I think we should, we've got a couple of problems. One is this is moving really fast, and our board does not move really fast. So I think if we are going to weigh in, and I think given the stakes, I would like that. It would be nice to give some parameters that would give, like you and Jill, the ability to act kind of quickly and feel like within certain parameters you can send a letter to the community saying, the Senate's about to do something that's going to cost us $2 million. You might want to know about it, and
or more,
and let some people know. I'm not sure we can wade in too deeply on some of the consolidation questions, because I think they're really wide open, and I'm not sure where the community is necessarily on some of those questions. But certainly the questions around funding mechanisms that are going to create the type of panic we had 2 years ago, those are not doing anyone any good. And just, I think kind of beyond the board, obviously from, the education bill can only do education, but, I just want to, again, reiterate Brett's point that tackling the tough questions about how our school districts are structured, the size of our schools, the size of our classes, getting those in line before you radically change the funding formula, so cuts can be made strategically to fit what the legislature envisions our district should look like, is the legislature needs to find the courage to do that. They can't do what they did in the past, which is throw hard financial things at us and hope we figure out the rest. And it seems like at least the Senate is headed that way.
Thanks, Jim. Any other thoughts?
I have really strong feelings about minimum classroom sizes and minimum school sizes with some exceptions based on incredibly remote schools. I think that forcing communities to close small schools is hugely harmful for communities and for individuals. And without some kind of legislative cover or something that's coming down from somewhere else, I think that's irresponsible, and it's weak. It lacks boldness, it lacks leadership, it lacks responsibility and accountability on the part of our legislature. And I wrote a letter and suggested that that's important. And also, you know, having huge, you know, I think that we're actually somewhere in the middle. You know, we might have some pain, but it's not going to be nearly the pain that Champlain Valley is going to experience. I mean, they just had to cut 82 teachers, and they would have to cut 100 more based on the numbers that are in the Senate version. And it's a much bigger district, of course, and that's, Barry looks at a 20% tax increase. I mean, those numbers are not going to make anyone happy. And I just really feel very, very strongly about the class size and the school size thing. I just feel like no community is going to get behind closing their small school. It's never going to happen. And it has to come from somewhere else, and to sort of put financial pressure on communities and sort of force them in that kind of sideways way to do these really hard things. Having, you know, inter-districts, you know, small towns and districts in competition to sort of keep their school, that's just really, really toxic and harmful, and it totally is just a lack of leadership. Sometimes hard choices need to be made.
Yeah. Thanks, Rhett. Amani, and then I'll put myself on the stack.
Yeah, Rhett, I hear you and I completely understand. I think that I still have the lovely 11-page PDF open that Daniela Sutherland wrote originally, and I still think that this is one of the best worded arguments against this really potentially devastating plan. And I guess I'm curious because I know Jason Ginkle sent out an email to the students maybe a month or two ago about like how students can get more involved, but I know that students don't always check their emails and aren't always like reading into them. So I'm curious, like with the time that Miriam and I have left on the board, is there a way for us to reach out to students and try to get their input? Because I think Jason's email is pretty much like there's a lot going on here and it's moving really fast. And the one thing they don't have is any student input. And I know that students aren't the only ones that will be affected by whatever happens, but they will be greatly affected. And I think it would be really interesting and helpful if students who are interested could at least learn more about this. Because just amongst track friends from here to U32, like some of them understand that something's happening, and you know they're all like prepared or not prepared to merge like as a Washington Central idea, but I don't think they understand that the current prediction could be way more broad and devastating, and I don't think unless a student on the board is hearing all this, they know any of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really under the radar, and I think it would be amazing if students and others could be more aware and give their opinion.
So, sort of building off that, I know this is going fast and unpredictably in the Senate. Is it too late for that sort of thing?
I don't think so, because if the Senate passes what they have in front of them, they have to go to like a few senators and a few state reps get together in a conference committee, and they have to find a compromise between where the two bills are right now. And so there's influence I think we can have at that point, and then both houses have to vote on whatever the compromise committee comes up with. So we have influence at that point, and then we also have influence with the governor. So I think there's still time. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I put myself on the stack. And that was to say, I think I'm going to remember this, to your point, Jim, about whether or not we have the details to weigh in on consolidation, I would say no if we were going to say, here's what consolidation should look like. But what I appreciate about the House, what's in the House bill, is that the committee is made up of educational experts and leaders, in addition to, I think, some legislators. And so it has the people who will be able to address those kinds of questions, like what is like a small school by necessity, and what is the best research tell us about class sizes, rather than just made up of legislators. And so that to me feels like at a level that we could weigh in and say, that's a smart approach to figuring out this very big issue of consolidation, and having some way of coming up with some answers.
Yeah, I mean, I like the House bill. I just think there's more, I think there's more consensus on not wanting funding undermined for our existing schools in this community than there's consensus on what consolidation should look like. But I'm comfortable with us supporting a process of consolidation that hears from the people that need to be heard from, which is the administrators and superintendents and education experts.
You know, I was thinking about that, and I had a thought. If I'm a legislator, do I want superintendents part of the discussion about consolidation when there's so much for superintendents? That's really, is that not a conflict of interest? And you know, there's some complications there, which I don't doubt that people can be honest, but I could see where someone might suspect that conflict of interest might sort of have an effect on different perspectives, which I don't think is fair to our superintendents, but it just occurred to me that might be a hesitation.
Just for a point of clarity, Brett, the House bill has former superintendents, retired board members, and retired superintendents.
So that consideration is, yeah, and I think that I'm pretty confident that current superintendents are going to try to talk about the best thing for Vermont and Vermont students and Vermont's educators, you know.
Yeah.
As am I.
Other thoughts?
I think the House version, you know, it might have some attractive elements in it, but there's elements in there that maybe you wouldn't be attracted to if you knew them. For example, it has minimum class sizes, which the Senate version doesn't. The House version uses this approach to generating weights and funding that's based on Vermont's historical spending. So it's not based on like evidence-based modeling of how money should be spent. It's like what Vermont has been doing for the past 7 years. It also adds $37 million of more education spending. And another problem with it is that the tax implications that you saw for the Senate version are even worse with the House version. They just haven't been modeled yet. So, you know, it's all bad. And I mean, I think like if the board had to take a position on House or Senate, it could be a pretty long argument. So I don't know. It doesn't feel like it would be a good use of time, I think. I mean, I think there's elements generally that like, you know, people can speak to and have an opinion about. Like I have a strong opinion that, you know, the state is supposed to provide an adequate education for all students in the state, but the state doesn't provide anything at all right now, right? You can decide to spend whatever you want on students in your district. And that's why things are so different from place to place, and so inequitable. So that is a problem. And that's why a foundation formula does make sense. And that's why so many other states have landed on that distribution mechanism, whereas Vermont hasn't. We have this like bizarre tax setup where if you have the same per pupil spending, you have the same tax rate, but it doesn't lead to anything approaching fair. So, I think it's a pretty fraught area. And I mean, I think the board trying to take a position on House or Senate or something else could be a pretty long conversation.
I think if there's anything that, like, there's any like policy discussion process that would justify a summer study committee, it's this one. Like, it's so impactful. The bodies are so far apart on so many issues, and there's a real lack of understanding, I think, in the public about what any of it means for anyone. I mean, Jake's point is well taken that I don't know the details in any of these bills, and I can try and follow this. But it just seems so half-baked at this point and not ready for prime time that I agree with Jake that like I don't think it is wise to try and say, I like this bill or that bill that is gonna change. I think really, if there's anything I would support, it's just that folks take a breath, not do what whoever Jim was talking to was saying, just sign something for the sake of signing it.
Yeah.
And it's not bad to think and discuss and try and get it right.
Jill, and then Scott.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said, and I said, well, the two things that came to mind for me were the tax rate implications for some of the districts that probably can least afford it right now are pretty out of balance. I think, like you pointed out, like ours was like a 3% difference, whereas there are some that are double digit. And then the other piece I think is just, it continues to feel like it's sort of pulling levers and pushing, like you were saying about like pushing this way and pulling this lever to try to force behavior to change or to force some sort of magic reduction. And then we know that healthcare like is a huge part of costs. And so the same headline of, Senate Finance Committee plugs their nose to pass that bill out of committee, saying they hated everything about it, but they were going to pass it out. And then the next headline is double-digit increases from our health insurance regulators. So it does still feel like the only thing that can come from sort of twisting those levers without addressing some of those underlying costs, it's not administrators, and it's not, these are. You can close a building, you can remove administrators, you can continue to cut staff and provide a less adequate education, but it still feels like kind of shuffling the deck chairs a little bit because, or sort of avoiding one of the major cost drivers. I'm not saying they can do anything about it, but it does feel like it's pain without a lot of purpose.
Did you have your hand up, Scott?
I did. Yeah, just really quickly, Jake, I completely agree with what you were saying about not taking a position. And I think I also agree with a lot of what everyone else is saying. I think our job is to help get that information to our community and let the community members decide what their position is. And so I very much appreciated Libby took the time to draft a letter. I saw the article in 7 days. I think as much as we can get that information out to our community members, I think we're doing a good job. I think we don't necessarily have to say yes on the Senate bill or no on the Senate bill to still be effective at educating the community
I
the
would agree with
effects
that.
of what's being proposed.
Yeah, I like that I think fact-based communication, and I think I've heard from people there's a hunger, like people are confused, they know something's going on, they don't have the time to follow it. even if they have, I think it takes a lot of time to follow, it's complex.
Yes.
So I think fact-based, I would be very supportive of having Libby send out fact-based, here's what's being proposed, and here's some facts that we know it will have if it's passed. And then let people decide whether they want to weigh in or how they want to weigh in. I get behind that.
Yeah.
Do we need to move to?
We don't need to move on that. One addition that could be in something like that is something I am hearing people say, which is like, we could encourage the state legislature to just take a breath and not feel like they have to rush this decision. Could be the thing we are asking people to get mobilized around if we wanted to go a little bit beyond just, offering the information and letting people kind of decide for themselves. It wouldn't be taking any position on any of the particular details or either of the versions of the bill, but as we've said here before, this is not a decision that can be rushed and just get it in front of the governor just so we can get a signature on it.
That's what they do.
I mean, what's he gonna do if he has nothing to sign?
I think they can.
I'm sure there's some worry about
back.
finger pointing back at the legislature, but there's a lack of leadership on both sides, honestly.
Yeah. So, Jake, you went off mute. Did you want to add anything?
I still don't think interpreting the actions of the legislature for the community is necessarily a good idea. I appreciate the observation that it should be fact-based. That's pretty tough to pin down at this point. Like saying that Barry's tax rate is going to go up by 20 whatever cents, is alarmist because the tax environment is not really known in FY 27 or 28, 29, 30, or whenever this happens. To say that our district would lose 2 million doesn't make sense because our district may not exist anymore. I think it's a complicated policy area for sure. And I worry about giving a message to the community that is meant to incite them. If we could decide as a group on some messaging, then I would maybe be up for it. But, I think it's a little bit risky.
It sounded like the direction we were going was the message would be, as best as we can, the facts. And we think that this is a decision that requires more deliberation. So we would encourage the legislature not to rush.
Urging the legislature not to rush seems fine. That is not, a sensitive statement at all. And fact-based, to the extent that we want to be saying anything to the community, if they are really fact-based, then I guess that's okay too. But there's definitely some interests and people who I don't know. There's a distillation of things and a lot of misinformation and a lot of things that are really far from being told or known. So it's just difficult to make objective observations about these bills. So it would take a lot of tuning to get that right.
Jim?
I mean, I hear all that, and I also think that we do have at least some ballpark ideas of what these bills would do. And I'm very fearful of being in a situation like we were in a couple of years ago, and the community saying, why did you just sit on your hands and not let us know that this was coming, or that this was brewing? Because I think the community does care, and if we can not just be observers and then, you know, whine about it in December when we have to cut 20 teacher positions, I think I would rather take some risks now than be in that spot.
It seems like one thing you can say from what Jake's saying is that no one has any idea what this is going to do. I mean, there's your fact that
Right.
this is a shoot first, aim second strategy, and maybe we shouldn't do it like on this time scale.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'm gathering that we're good with sending something to the community that shares high level of what's going on and encourages folks to be paying attention as best they can. And in fact, the best thing that we could be doing right now is slowing the process down so that there is more time for deliberation and thoughtfulness.
And that could be the message to the community, that there are potential implications here, but the implications could be big, but there's also a lot of uncertainty, and you know, we're worried that action may be taken without full knowledge of the implications.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so those are the broad strokes of any kind of communication we would provide to the community in the next week or so, given, you know, assuming nothing changes. I don't know what good knocking on wood is going to do, because lots of things are going to change. Okay. So moving on then from this discussion. Folks good to do that? Okay. So then we have policy reading, the second reading of policy C15, student conduct and discipline. We're actually pulling the first reading of the policy behavior threat assessment because that wasn't ready yet. We'll put that on next meeting's agenda, but we have the second reading of policy C15.
Yeah, and I had two, they're sort of legislative / policy updates. So the behavior threat assessment is a piece that came out of a bill that passed in, I think, 2023. The Agency of Education is responsible for providing model policies for each district to have a behavior threat assessment team and have a policy and a procedure. And so Jess Murray and I have pulled that up. She was able to get that from her AOE contact because their website didn't have it up yet. But we have not had a policy committee meeting in which we reviewed that piece yet. And the other thing that is legislative related is, and the VSBA had this in one of their updates, they're actually, and it looks like it's still in H480, which is the miscellaneous education fixes. They actually have a piece asking that the boards not have to adopt procedures for this. And the other component that we were a little worried about that is also being struck if H480 continues on its path was pretty stringent data reporting requirements from districts to the Agency of Education of the actual names of all the people who are in the behavior threat assessment team on the school, because there's annual training requirements. And there's a concern that if we have to do that every year, first of all, people can change mid-year, but also is that going to limit us for how many people we can train, because they have to come to this AOE training. We can't do like a train the trainer. So it actually makes us sort of have a smaller team.
If we put the person's name in the policy,
yeah, and
instead of the role.
And if we have to do the trainings the way that they were articulated in the original bill. So there are some changes to that particular behavioral threat assessment policy. The other piece that's in H480, which is out of the House and is now in the Senate, is to postpone that requirement until October. So for that and a million, for several reasons, we'd like to push this off. But We do have a draft policy that the policy committee will review at our next policy meeting that we can bring to the board.
Of C15.
I'm sorry, of the behavior threat assessment.
Oh, got it. Okay, this is the context for why we don't have that one in front of us
Yes,
today.
sorry.
Got it.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, and C15 is the student conduct and discipline. It's a required policy, and this is required language. So this would be the second reading of that one. And then I did want to add, in the same H480 actually, we've talked in the past about having a phone-free school policy, and that language has been added to the miscellaneous education bill as well, that basically requires all districts to have a phone-free school policy beginning in the 2026-2027 school year. And so the policy that the board adopts has to be at least as stringent as the model policy from the agency, and if we don't adopt that policy or we don't come up with our own, it's a presumption that we've adopted the AOE model policy. So
that's
phone-free
if
schools is actually H480, which
passes.
is like a miscellaneous education sort of catch-all. So that's suddenly moving again.
Huh?
Yeah.
Is that on the calendar?
Yeah. Yeah. So those were some policies/legislative updates I wanted to make sure that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's good stuff. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on policy C15 for the policy committee to consider?
Did I hear you say that this is a required policy and this is required language?
Yes, and this is the one we spoke about last
Yep.
meeting.
Yep.
And so we were going to work with administrators to see how we could get student input. So I think Libby was going to ask the administrators if they had suggestions on how we could do that.
More for the procedures and like what would show up in the handbook than the policy
Right.
itself, since we
Right.
can't change the language of the policy. Any other C15 questions or thoughts? Okay, so then policy monitoring for C12. Prevention of sexual harassment as prohibited by Title IX.
I move we accept the policy monitoring report.
I'll second.
I'll second.
And it does report compliance and it does not make recommendations to change the policy. I'm trying to be good about checking that.
Yes, right, right. Great. Any discussion? Okay. Trying to mute that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Anna, did you get my email? I don't know if she can help me out with the technology here. My computer just died.
No.
Great. Would you be able to pull that up, please? Before we adjourn our meeting tonight, we'd like to take a few minutes to remember Nathan Suter. Words will likely not suffice, but we will try. Nathan was the definition of community-minded, lending his efforts, time, talents, and spirit to so many important spaces in our schools and our town. He led the effort to rebuild our middle and high school track programs, which now more than 100 middle schoolers and dozens of high school athletes take part in and excel in. And as a part-time coach of the middle schoolers, I can say without a doubt that it is a team that fosters fun, growth, and enthusiasm. And I know we owe Nathan a great deal of gratitude for that. He was also a passionate advocate for public education. Here on the school board, we heard from him a great deal. And I relished those conversations with him, and I deeply appreciated his perspective. This photo that we're sharing here is Nathan outside City Hall on town meeting day last year, working at the 11th hour to pass our school budget in the freezing rain and with a smile on his face.
That's who he was. And there are so many more examples that I could share. As a husband to my MRPS's beloved teacher, Morgan Lloyd, dad to Amani and Asa, and a dear friend to so many people, he was intimately woven into the fabric of this community. And there is now a huge hole where he used to be. The line of mourners weaving around the block last night and the beautiful tributes posted in his honor symbolize what he meant to so many and how much he will be missed. I hope Morgan, Amani, and Asa that this outpouring of love brings you some measure of comfort and peace as you begin to navigate life without him. We're holding you in our hearts and are here for you. If there are any other board members who want to share anything, you can, but you certainly don't have to. And I don't know if Libby is still online.
Hold on.
I can. I worked with Nathan and a group of folks on our visioning project, and so got to know him and know what he was about. And when Roxbury was basically losing RVS, I spoke to him a lot. And there were times when folks had strong feelings, and that generated strong feelings, and I might bring up a certain person, he would say, I just spoke with them. He really didn't want to see RVS close, and he hated the whole situation just as much as everyone in Roxbury did, really, and I think everyone in Montpelier as well. But he said, he would say, I just talked to that person and they're lovely. And I always knew that was what he would say a lot. When I was sort of disagreeing with someone in the community, he would champion them, that they were wonderful people. And I remember one time he called me, and he had just delivered a car full of Montpelier kids to Roxbury, and he told me that he had just done that for some social event, and he was like, it's happening. And I just hope I can be a little bit more like Nathan and maybe smile a little more. That's what I hope.
Yeah, Nathan was one of my dearest friends. I know how much he loved his community. I know how much he loved his family. I know how much he just loved life. And ironically, his heart failed him, but his heart never failed anyone else. He was one of the biggest hearted, most loving, most generous, most giving people I've ever met. And his capacity to bring people together genuinely, authentically, really unmatched by anyone I've met. And his ability to know what was the right thing to do and to have the courage to do it time after time after time is unmatched. And he was a light that burns so brightly, and I know that light will guide us. And I just want to say to Amani, Asa, and Morgan that we love you so much, and we're there for you, and there's nothing that can fill the hole of this loss, but we can give you love, and you can use the love and strength I know he gave all of you to move forward. But it's really hard right now. It's really, really hard for this whole community, and for Amani's family especially. It's really hard and really sad. And we all need to give more hugs like Nathan did.
Yeah. Yeah, you gave the best hugs.
I don't have anything new to add. I just want to reiterate, anytime we lose a beloved community member, it's hard. But the loss of a father, of a student, and the spouse of a teacher, a coach, a friend, a community member that engaged so much like Nathan did. Amani, your mother, and your brother, he will never be forgotten, and you will always be loved and supported by this community. Thank you for sharing.
I often find some solace in other people's words, so I'll close us with a verse from Bob Dylan's Forever Young, because I think it describes Nathan really well. May your hands always be busy. May your feet always be swift. May you have a strong foundation when the winds of changes shift. May your heart always be joyful. May your song always be sung. And may you stay forever young. Thanks, Nathan. We're gonna miss you.
Thank you for doing that.
Maybe we should have adjourned first. Feels kind of dumb to vote right now. Okay, meeting adjourned. Good night, everyone.